Hello and welcome to another episode of the Stupid History Podcast, where we discover some of the stupidest events in the history of colonial Bengal. I'm your host, Tintin. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you and your families, wherever you are in the world, are safe amidst this global pandemic. On today's episode, we will talk about a major commercial hub in Bengal which turned into a ghost town in only 4 years. And this was done because our usual villain in our stories, the British East India Company, wanted to make some extra pounds for its shareholders back in England. I am talking about the colonial emporium of Qasim Bazar, or Kashim Bazar as it is known today. Today, Kashim Bazar is a quaint little town in the Murshidabad district of West Bengal, with a tiny railway station, a palace repurposed into a heritage hotel, and a plenty of dilapidated remains of its old colonial grandeur. The year was 1704. By the approval of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, the Diwan or the Chief Revenue Officer of Bengal Province, Murshid Quli Khan, transferred the revenue headquarters of Bengal from Dhaka, which is now in modern-day Bangladesh, to a new town that he named Murshidabad after himself. This new settlement was located about 210 kilometers upriver from Calcutta, then just a decade-old British trading post. This new revenue headquarters was well chosen. It sat on the banks of the Bhagirathi River, a branch of the Ganges that had become a major transport route for European trade in Bengal. Murshidabad was surrounded by a very fertile land, and it was very productive agriculturally. Also, there were weavers in the nearby villages, and they were renowned for producing some of the finest silk cloth in all of India. Murshid Quli did not move from Dhaka alone. He recognized that if he planned properly, Murshidabad would become a thriving business center within a few years. So he encouraged the rich Jain moneylenders and business houses in Dhaka to move with him to his new headquarters. They were given generous land grants and tax exemptions and were encouraged to invest in the development of commerce and industry in the new settlement. Murshid Quli also realized that the European traders were the future of trade in Bengal. After all, they were willing to pay high prices for local products and were also willing to dole out substantial bribes and license fees to purchase special commercial privileges and access to powerful circles. But he was also very aware that thriving European businesses came with a risk, that they might acquire political power as their business grew, and they might become challengers to the political authority of himself or his successor. He had seen this happening before with the Portuguese, and that's why he wanted to move with absolute caution. He invited the British, the French, and the Dutch companies to share in the trade of his new capital, but he put them together in a speck of land only 15 square miles wide in the middle of a sharp horseshoe-shaped bend in the river, about 3 miles south of Murshidabad. This new European business enclave came to be known as Kashim Bazar. It was more or less secure because it was surrounded on three sides by the river, and the space constraints ensured that the European operations there could not grow beyond a certain point. It was also small enough and isolated enough for the Nawab to keep an eye on the Europeans. This was a political masterstroke. With the increase of power and authority of the Bengal Nawabs in the 1720s, 30s, and 40s, and the exponential growth of Murshidabad as the capital of the Bengal province, the European businesses in Kashim Bazar thrived. The British East India Company was the most successful of the European companies, and their warehouses were overflowing with raw silk and silk garments. These were ready to be shipped to England and sold in high prices, bringing in high returns for the East India Company's employees and shareholders. This thriving European trade helped Kashim Bazar grow as a settlement as well. From a collection of small hamlets, Kashim Bazar became one of the richest emporiums in Bengal, full of affluent businessmen, moneylenders who collaborated with the European companies. A 1750s account describes it as a flourishing urban center with population of about 100,000, and thickly packed with large, beautiful brick mansions. The mansions were so closely packed with each other that you could probably apparently go around the town just by jumping from one roof to another. The account also says that there was money everywhere and everyone in the town was rich. The business was so brisk that the small town needed about 100 resident bankers to work as its economic backbone. And yet, just 60 years later, all of this ended abruptly, and the thriving business emporium of Kashim Bazar turned into a ghost town, reclaimed by forests. Now, like most stupid decisions made by the British East India Company, this one was also motivated by the urge to extend the profit margin for the benefit of its shareholders back in England. To understand this decline in Kashim Bazar's fortunes, we have to start in 1765. After the victories at Plessy and Buxar, the British East India Company, which, once again, to remind you, was a business enterprise, had for all practical purposes become the rulers and tax collectors of the Bengal province. This sudden accumulation of political, military, and financial power led to large-scale irregularities and oppression by the company's employees. They often put their own interest ahead of the company's. As a fallout, the East India Company became bankrupt in 1773. They had to be bailed out by the British Parliament, who put checks and balances in place to rein in their activities. By 1810, companies' finances were again in dire straits, and their stock prices were taking a nosedive. To prevent the possibility of a bailout, and therefore more checks placed on their power by the British Parliament, the company scrambled to save some money from wherever they could. It was around this time that the company's attention turned to the horseshoe-shaped bend on the Bhagirathi River, where Kashim Bazar was located. It was believed that this windy bit of the river unnecessarily slowed down the journey of companies' cargo boats to Kashim Bazar and beyond to Murshidabad. Employees in Kashim Bazar complained that since the bend of the river passed in front of the French and the Dutch territories, they were actually harassing the British cargo boats and charging hefty fees for passage. Apparently, some affluent families were doing the same, leading the company to spend a lot of money unnecessarily on all these fees. The company believed that if the course of the river could somehow be diverted away from the bend and straightened to avoid going to the French and the Dutch settlements, the East India Company would end up saving a lot of money and a lot of time. The company acted swiftly. It summoned its engineers and surveyors to Calcutta. Among them was a junior surveyor called James Purlby. He came up with a plan. He said that a straight channel could be dug from the beginning of the bend near Murshidabad to the end of the bend near the new British cantonment town of Baharampur, about 3 miles south. In its changed course, the river would now flow straight from Murshidabad to Baharampur, completely avoiding the Dutch and the French settlements. The bend would gradually dry up or remain as an isolated horseshoe lake. This plan was approved and the work was completed in 1813. But this plan had a major flaw. Can you spot it? Well, along with isolating the Dutch and the French settlements from the river, it also isolated the thriving British commercial operations. The moment the river changed course, it became more difficult and expensive for the British warehouses in Kashim Bazar to access their cargo boats. While earlier, these cargo boats could come right up to the warehouse loading bays, now loading the boats with merchandise included a 3-mile-long trek because the river had moved away. Because of these difficulties and mounting losses, the East India Company abandoned their Kashim Bazar settlement in 1814, which is just 1 year after the river changed its course. And they were soon followed by the Dutch and the French. As the Europeans left, business sharply declined. Soon, the rich Indian bankers and businessmen left too, leaving behind their empty mansions. Then came a mysterious fever epidemic. In 1815, it killed about 1/3 of the remaining population. The survivors abandoned Kashim Bazar soon after, leaving behind the sick and the dying and the dead bodies rotting on the streets. Slowly, much of the once thriving emporium of Kashim Bazar was reclaimed by dense forest. The horseshoe lake around Kasim Bazar, which was the old course of the river, it still exists. It is now, ironically, locally known as Katigonga, or the canal. Open a Google map and check it out. You can also look at the 18th century map of Bengal to see the actual course of the river with the horseshoe-shaped bend that made Kashim Bazar possible in the first place. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for tuning in today. Do let me know what you thought about this episode. Subscribe to the Stupid History podcast on Spotify or Podbean to be updated about more episodes that's coming up every week on Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Indian time. You can also follow us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, and that's the Facebook page and YouTube channel of Heritage Walk Calcutta, to listen to more such podcasts, to participate in our daily trivia, or to watch more videos. To support our research at this trying time of a global pandemic, please make a donation on patreon.com/heritagewalkcal. That is patreon.com/heritagewalkcal. Thank you, stay home, stay safe, and keep smiling. I'll see you next week.